June 28th edition of PFT PM. It's a Friday, not leading into a holiday weekend. That's kind of next week. The fourth lands on Thursday, so it really isn't that 4 or 5 day vibe where everything resets and we come out on the other end feeling very different. The NFL could use a hard reset after what happened yesterday in federal court in California, the Sunday ticket verdict. Now, we talked about it yesterday when the verdict first was entered. And there was some confusion early on about what the verdict actually is. We now know, and the league has confirmed, 4.6 billion for the class of residential Sunday ticket customers from June of 2011 through February of 2023. That's 12 seasons. 2.4 million residential customers, 4.6 billion for them, and another 960 million on top of that 96 million. I keep getting this wrong. 96 million, not 960. Slight difference. 96 million for the commercial establishments that were, according to the allegations and as accepted by the jury, overcharged through antitrust violations for the Sunday ticket package. So that is 4.696 billion. When that gets trebled, and let me just do it one more time to make sure my math is accurate, because sometimes it is and sometimes it ain't. 4.696 times 3 is 14.088 billion. See, under most civil legal standards, when you have somebody who deliberately did something wrong, something that intentionally violated someone else's rights, part of the recovery is potentially punitive damages. In the antitrust field, there is no requirement to establish punitive damages, to go over and above the violation. The violation in and of itself requires punishment, and the punishment is whatever the verdict is that's rendered by the jury gets multiplied by 3. That's how 4.696 becomes 14.088. That's the number. And I've seen 4.7 all over the place. People just either don't realize or I feel like I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this because I think the coverage or lack thereof speaks for itself. But man, there's a lot of media outlets that aren't really paying attention to this. And it's either they just don't understand how significant it is, or they've decided we're going to look the other way on this. We're going to do the NFL a solid here, either because they have a relationship with the NFL or they want to have a relationship with the NFL. The NFL is really big and really powerful. And I think a lot of people are exercising editorial discretion to not make a big deal about this. I'm not one of those people. And hey, it's one of the benefits of the deal that we did with NBC 15 years ago, Monday, July 1. That's the anniversary. The promise that was made to me by Rick Cordella, who's now the head of NBC Sports. He was the head of NBCSports.com at the time. I get final say over anything and everything that I write. And look, there are some restraints that apply here because this really isn't my platform, but still, it's an extension of what we write about. And I'm going to cover this thing. It needs to be covered. If it makes people at 345 Park Avenue uncomfortable, I got some free advice. Don't violate the federal antitrust laws, and then we won't have any reason to talk about things that you might not want us to talk about. So where does this go from here? Spinning it forward, things we didn't know or at least didn't get into yesterday. July 31 is the next key date. That's when the lawyers go back to court for the hearings on what they call post-trial motions. One hearing. I accidentally added an S at the end of the word hearing. I apologize. Hearing on post-trial motions. And the biggest one is the NFL's request for judgment as a matter of law under Rule 50 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. The judge didn't rule on that request for judgment as a matter of law before the jury verdict. The judge said, I'll hold this until after. The judge could take it all away. The judge could say to the plaintiffs, hey, there's a defect in your case. You failed to introduce sufficient evidence on which a reasonable jury could base the verdict that they entered. Well, why would they enter the verdict then? Are you saying the jury isn't reasonable? No. The argument would be there's a technical list of requirements I was on with Mad Dog yesterday, and I said it's kind of like and I may have said this here too. Hell, I don't remember. It's like when you get the Lego set and you've got the booklet and it shows you how it all goes together. Like there's a step-by-step thing to build what it is you're trying to build. If you leave out steps, you don't build the thing you're trying to build. And somebody may say, hey, that looks nice when it's done. Yeah, that looks nice, but it's not what it was supposed to be. So the jury, by virtue of the fact that they probably don't like what the NFL did here. And what the NFL did was very simple. They came into court and their witnesses all said in very self-serving fashion, we didn't have any conspiracy to rig the price of Sunday tickets so people would choose to not buy it and just watch whatever games were on their local CBS and Fox affiliates. And we didn't intend to do that. We didn't design to do that. There was no side deal with CBS or Fox. All of the stuff they said from the witness stand, there were plenty of documents that trickled in throughout the course of the trial that contradicted that. And so even if there was some potential flaw in the evidence that prevents all of the elements being proven, or at least to have enough evidence to support a jury verdict on that point, it all comes down to what the jury decides it wants to believe. If there is some flaw in the evidence that was presented that prevents that step-by-step instruction on what it takes to lead to a federal antitrust violation, that's what could cause the judge to say, I'm throwing the whole thing out. And the jury, and this is what happens. The jury is going to make its decisions based upon what it does or doesn't believe to be fair. The jurors aren't lawyers. And, you know, in a lot of jurisdictions, they don't even send the instructions back with the jury when it's time to deliberate. They're basically at the whims of whichever lawyer persuades them the most to go along with what the lawyer wants them to do. And I think by the time they got to the end of this case, the jury was far more inclined to accept what the plaintiff's lawyer had to say than what the defendant's lawyer had to say, which explains why the NFL lost and why the number was so big. But if there is a fatal flaw lurking somewhere in the case that was put on by the plaintiffs, the judge could still do what he threatened to do in open court a week and a half ago. And that made a lot of waves because it is unconventional for a judge to say in open court, I'm going to throw your case out. That's why it's still possible the judge will throw the case out. That would be something. NFL loses a verdict, $14.088 billion when you triple the 4.696, and now the judge pulls the plug and it's all gone. The magnitude of the verdict means that whoever loses coming out of Judge Gutierrez's courtroom is going to appeal as aggressively and extensively as possible because there's too much money attached to it now. It's guaranteed that whoever loses here is going to go to the next level, and that's what I'm going to talk about now, the first rung on the appellate ladder. The United States is divided into various circuits for appeals court purposes. California's in the Ninth Circuit. You have an automatic right to appeal. I was explaining this to Mad Dog yesterday. There are, 15, 20 judges on the circuit, maybe more. I don't know exactly how many, but I do know this. When it's time for the case to be heard, you show up and you find out which 3 judges are going to handle the case. And it's roll of the dice, luck of the draw. And you might get 3 judges that like your case. You might get 3 judges that don't like your case. It might go 2-1 for you. It might go 2-1 for the other one. And that one judge, the third one, however they do the random process of picking the judges, that third judge, it could have been a different one and everything changes. That's how close these cases can be. After there's a ruling from the 3-judge panel, there would be an opportunity to seek a rehearing in front of the whole court. Then the next step would be to take the case to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the whole idea of a rehearing before the whole court, that doesn't happen very often, but I think it's one of the steps you're required to take. There's a lot of things when you're trying to preserve your ability to appeal issues in the court system. You've got to try, you've got to exhaust, you've got to do everything that's available. You have to check the boxes. And I think one of the boxes you have to check before you can file a petition for appeal with the U.S. Supreme Court, and they technically call it a writ of certiorari. I don't know what that means. I think I know how to spell it. I think I remember that much. But basically, you want the Supreme Court to take the case. Before you can even ask them to do it, you've got to appeal to the first level federal appeals court. You have an automatic right of appeal there. Then, if you lose, you file the motion for a rehearing before the full appellate court. All the judges of the appellate court They don't have to do that. You have to ask for it, I believe, to preserve your right to then ask the Supreme Court, please take up the case. And it feels like it's destined for the Supreme Court. That doesn't mean the Supreme Court takes it up. 4 of the justices have to agree to take up the issue. If 4 take it up, 5 have to rule in favor. Sometimes the court will take up a case because they want to affirm the decision and create precedent that would make it clear coast to coast what the law is. And that's one of the things you try to sell the U.S. Supreme Court on when you're trying to get them to take your case. Hey, on this issue, there's a split among the various circuit courts of appeal. Half of them say this, half of them say that. You need to take this case up and you need to resolve this so we all know what the law is. We know what the rules are. That's one way you get in. Or they just think it's an egregious miscarriage of justice and they want to overturn it. That's where the Clarence Thomas Super Bowl ring potentially comes into play. That's where the reality that 6 of the 9 justices were appointed by Republican presidents and have a pro-business bias, whether they admit it or not. And it makes it more likely that the NFL will win. It's a lot to pin your hopes on. Because first you got to get in, and then you got to hope you'll win when you get in. But it's not as flimsy. It's not as remote. It's not the kind of long shot that maybe you would think it would be. They actually do have a chance to win this thing. They're going to be nervous. They're going to be anxious. There's going to be a lot of fretting and planning for how to come up with $14.088 billion plus all the other stuff. I wrote about this at PFT today. Interest, pre-judgment, post-judgment, attorney's fees. The number at the end of the day, if $14.088 billion stands, is going to be more than that. A lot more than that. Not billions more, but maybe closer to 15 billion than 14 billion by the time it's all said and done. So a lot of eggs in that basket, but the Supreme Court could ultimately provide relief for the NFL. And here's a rough timeline. July 31, that's when the judge is going to hold the hearing. Let's say the judge issues a 35-page written ruling on the post-trial motions before Halloween. That would give the losing side 30 days to file a notice of appeal to the Ninth Circuit. Then the Ninth Circuit gets it. They communicate everything. They ask for the record. They set a briefing schedule, and they let the case work its way through the appellate process. That usually takes about a year. So that gets us into late 2025. Then, if you take it to the Supreme Court, we're getting into 26 or 27 by the time it's all said and done. So there could be a lot more time that goes on before this is resolved. The end result could be a much greater final bottom line award because the interest is going to keep racking up as time goes by, or at the end of the day, the NFL could win the whole thing. We'll see how that plays out. And again, it's been around for 9 years. We're looking at maybe 3 years or so before this whole thing is resolved. Let's assume that at the end of the day, the base amount is upheld, that it's $14.088 billion that is due to the plaintiffs. Something I wrote about today at PFT, it's not going to be simple to carve this pie up. There are 2.4 million residential customers who are part of this class action. 4.6 billion has been earmarked for them, and that 4.6 becomes, I want to make sure I have the number right, 4.6 times 3 is 13.8 billion just for them. 2.4 million. If you do the basic math, you divide 13.8 by, I think it's, what is it? It's if you divide 13.8 by 2.4 million, you're looking at 5,700 each. But there's going to be some that had it some of the years, some that had it one of the years, some that had it all of the years. I mean, these numbers could be all over the place by the time it's all said and done. And let's remember, before we start dividing that number up, the lawyers are going to get their piece. And people are going to be upset if the lawyers get 40% of 13.8 billion. That is, I'm multitasking here and I screwed it up. 13.8 times 0.4 is 5.52 billion. People will lose their crap over that. The argument in response is this antitrust violation that lingered in plain sight for 30 years. Think about it. Sunday Ticket goes back to 1994. This case has been hanging around for 9 years. Somebody had to bring it. Somebody had to see the potential merit. And this was a fight for 9 years. Case got thrown out. They had to go through the appellate system to get it reinstated. And then you got to fight, you got to scratch, you got to claw. Ultimately, you go to trial. You spend a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money. You get rewarded when you take on a risk like that. That's the incentive. There'll be a contingent fee agreement that was signed with the named plaintiffs and the lawyers who are handling the case. And the judge will have to approve it, but don't be surprised if it's a multi-billion-dollar reward. This is one of the reasons why, and I've said this before, but it bears repeating. Big companies hate class actions because it's a device for giving lawyers an incentive to go after companies that are harming a whole lot of people by a little bit. Because let's say I got a $5,000 claim against the NFL for gouging the price of Sunday Ticket so that they could protect the local Fox and NBC, or not Fox and NBC, Fox and CBS affiliate broadcast. Let's say that I've got that case. I go to a lawyer and I lay out my idea. And the lawyer's thinking, boy, it's going to be hard to prove. I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to have to do that. They're going to fight me. It's going to be expensive. I got to fly here. I got to fly there. Hey, if we win, how much do we get? Oh, $5,000. The lawyer's going to say, no, it's not worth my time for $5,000. But if you're one of 2.4 million who had this happen, maybe it is worth my time. That's where the class action comes from. And again, the companies hate it because it provides a device for letting a lot of people come together and go after a company that is screwing a lot of people on a basis that is so small they otherwise aren't going to be responsible. So that's why there's an incentive to take on these cases. That's why the lawyers want to take on these cases. And this is a way for basically private citizens, private attorneys on no public payroll. It incentivizes them to work as kind of like attorneys general who go out there and rectify things that the attorneys general don't have the resources, the time, the desire, the inclination to go after. So that's why the number is going to be big. And I defend it. They deserve it. They had a vision of what this could be. They fought the NFL tooth and nail for 9 years, and they won. They deserve their fair fee as negotiated in the fee agreement with the plaintiffs who were named in the case. One of the concerns that's been raised with me about the amount, let's say it is $14.088 billion. What does it do to the salary cap? Salary cap go down? Do the players lose that money? Does it, like the money that was lost during COVID and they had to reconfigure the cap and the cap didn't grow quite as quickly for a few years because of the losses. Well, the good news for the players, these losses don't attach to them. They attach to the NFL. This money comes out of the NFL's end. And in a weird sort of way, the players benefit because they got a chunk of the revenues pumped up by money that was the result of antitrust violations. And when it's time for the chickens to come home to roost, the players don't have to pay. Now, you may see the NFL argue at some point with the union that we need something here because you guys got a benefit from this that you really shouldn't have gotten. I could see that because the NFL throws its weight around and it tries anything it can. The players should just say, sorry, nobody forced you to do your business in a way that violated federal antitrust laws. So none of this money, in theory, is coming out of the pockets of the players. There could be an effort by the NFL moving forward to try to balance things out a little bit. And one of the realities is I think we're far more likely to see 18 games sooner than later. That's a way to make that money back. There's a lot of people on social media that just think, oh, all of a sudden now hot dogs are going to be $50 and ticket prices to games are going to go up exorbitantly because they're going to pass that $14 billion along to the consumers. That's not how supply and demand and market forces and ticket prices work. They're going to pay this money. They'll find other ways to make it back, but they're not going to pass it along to you. If anything, they're going to pass it along to the networks, and they're going to get their money back from the networks, or they're going to pass some of it along to the players in how they go about calculating the cap going forward. But I think at the end of the day, this is just something where they're going to write the check and they're going to eat it. It's going to be about $450 million per team if the final result is $14.088 billion. I mean, that's a lot of money, but these teams can afford to pay $450 million if they have to. The one big question moving forward, wrote about this earlier today as well, is the NFL going to change anything about how Sunday Ticket is priced? Because they might ultimately win before the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court might say, hey, the way you've been doing it is perfectly fine. It's not an antitrust violation. It falls within the scope of your broadcast antitrust exemption, or you're not the end seller. You can't be responsible for antitrust violations as it relates to the setting of the price because you're not the one that was selling it to these people. They could win on the law, which would validate everything they've done, and they could keep on doing what they've done. But they won't know for about 2 or 3 years. Until then, what do we do with Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV? The class doesn't include 2023, so they already have one more year of, we're going to get sued for that year. Now, we may get sued for 2024. And then, maybe we'll get sued for 2025, unless we win. It's a high-stakes gamble for the NFL. Are they going to change the way that Sunday Ticket is priced? Are they going to make it something that's available per team? Are they going to drop the price of it? Remember, ESPN wanted to pay or charge, $70 for the full package and make a single team option available. There was the memo from 2017 that became part of the closing argument where the NFL was considering getting rid of Sunday Ticket and putting the games on cable. So it would be like a Saturday of watching college football where you go to the various sports channels and there's a game, there's a game, there's a game, there's a game. And you don't have to pay anything extra for it. It's part of your package of channels. It's part of your sports tier. Or it would just be a very affordable way to say, I live in New Orleans. I like the Bears. I want to see all the Bears games. I'm going to pay the price to have all the Bears games. The NFL has to decide what it's going to do. And at the end of the day, I don't care if the NFL wins or loses. We all need to recognize, and I say this knowing full well there's a chance somebody from 345 Park Avenue is going to call NBC and complain. We should all want the NFL to wake up and realize they've been screwing the consumer for 30 years. They've been deliberately overcharging for Sunday Ticket, requiring DirecTV and now YouTube TV to charge an exorbitant price so people will say, man, too rich for my blood. Give me whatever's on CBS or Fox. Even though I really don't want to watch Steelers-Browns, I'd rather watch Vikings-Bears. I can't watch Vikings-Bears, and I'm not paying $389, $449, whatever the number is, to watch all the games. I'm not going to do it. That's what they've been counting on. Is that the way you should treat your consumers? To deliberately require the price of a premium product to be so high that you won't buy it, when they know damn well they could have made it available to you for a lot less money and you could have been enjoying these games all these years and not spending all that money for the privilege of doing so. So even if they win, even if the judge throws out the case, so they go to the Supreme Court and they get at least 5 justices to go along with them and they ultimately pay $0.00, I hope they're shamed into recognizing they need to do the right thing here. And I hope, and this is one of the reasons why I'm frustrated more people aren't covering this. The fans need to realize they've been screwed the last 30 years. I don't care what the NFL says about this. They have screwed the fans and the end users, the consumers, for 30 years by deliberately overcharging them for Sunday Ticket and not giving them the choice that they profess to make available. And they wrap themselves in the flag of there's free games available in every market. Well, that's fine. They're free, but I don't want those. I want the other ones. Make the other ones available and don't make it so damn expensive that most people aren't going to be able to afford it. I think that's it as it relates to Sunday Ticket. There'll be more. There'll be more developments. There'll be more takes. I have made a request to interview lawyers from both sides. The NFL respectfully declined to make anyone available. I think that's a missed opportunity to help people understand the case and why they're confident that they're eventually going to prevail. They sent out a detailed statement yesterday, and I'm in a position to ask fair, probing questions with meaningful follow-up aimed at helping people understand this. NFL said no. Let's see if the plaintiffs say yes. So we'll continue to cover this. Look, if you haven't heard, I practiced law for 19 years. I understand how these things work, and this is right in my wheelhouse. And also, it speaks to that part of me that loves pro football, but holds the NFL, the league office, to the standard that was sold to me by the voice of John Facenda in the early 1970s. And anytime I think the NFL falls short of that standard, I'm going to say so. And as it relates to Sunday Ticket, the NFL has fallen very short of that standard. The NFL has treated its consumers poorly over the last 30 years, and the reckoning has arrived. And to that I say, it's about time. And ultimately, look, the $14 billion isn't my money. I just want it to be right for the consumers going forward. If it's decided they have to pay the consumers some money, fine. The better outcome is, let's be more reasonable in how we make these games available. Let's not play this game where somebody's got to spend more than they need to spend to watch the games they want to watch, and have more flexibility to watch the games they do want to watch. All right, moving along. This is interesting to me. I wrote yesterday about some comments from Patrick Mahomes' mother, Randy Mahomes, and also this new Coors Light commercial where, because they can't have commercials with NFL players selling beer while they're active members of the league, the latest Coors Light commercial goes into a time capsule until Patrick Mahomes retired. And between that commercial and his mother, Randy, saying on a podcast that Patrick has said he might not play as long as Tom Brady, his family is going to be a factor, he wants to be around for his kids. When you consider that Patrick Mahomes turns 29 on September 17, 1995, or no, he was born September 17 of 1995. He turns 29 September 17 of 2024. Get your facts straight. He's getting closer and closer to the point where somebody's going to ask him, how much longer are you going to play? Tom Brady was getting those questions in his early 30s. Brett Favre started talking about retirement at 31 or 32. And it's fair to point out they're having fun with it in this Coors Light commercial. His mother is talking about the possibility he won't play until he's 45. He's going to be 29 in a couple of months. Someone's going to ask him at some point, how long are you going to play? And boy, Chiefs fans get triggered. I said this yesterday, but I've got a specific example I want to share with you. Folks, I love the guy. I want him to play forever. He's great for the league. He's the most valuable property the NFL currently has. He's a great guy. He's a great player. He's fun to watch. But as I said yesterday, he's not going to play pro football for the next 50 years. At some point, he's not going to be the quarterback of the Chiefs. And God forbid you point out that fact to Chiefs fans that have their sights set on winning, 20 Super Bowls in a row. So anyway, I'm mentioning it again today because my buddy Nick Wright, and you usually hear people say, I knew so-and-so when he had hair. I knew Nick Wright when he didn't have hair. That's how long I've known Nick Wright. And Nick Wright's called me out a couple of times on his FS1 show recently. And my general frontline frustration is, dude, you know how to find me. If you got any questions or concerns about anything I've said, if you need clarity, if you don't understand it, you can reach out to me. We can have a conversation. We can talk it through. I'm not being unreasonable with these things. I'm not trying to be a hater. I love the Chiefs. I love Patrick Mahomes. I want the Chiefs to do well. I think it's exciting because they don't blow people out. They make every win, especially in the postseason, a must-see event. So there was an item in the Kansas City Star somebody sent to me, and it's based on not any initial or original analysis from the person who wrote it. It's just, and here's the headline, Nick Wright crushes NBC reporter for story on Patrick Mahomes' future. I got more to say about the Kansas City Star, and I'll say that in a little bit. For now, I want to focus on my friend, Nick Wright. And he refers to me on his show as my pal. If you're my pal, seek me out. Let's have a conversation about this. Let's talk this through. Because, I hold the people in the media to a higher standard. I understand why the fans gloss over what I was saying because they just view it as, oh, you can't wait for Patrick Mahomes to retire. You don't like the Chiefs. You don't like Mahomes, which is bullshit. So I expect that from the fans. I don't expect it from somebody who really should know better. And I'm looking at some of the stuff that Nick Wright said, and I'm not gonna read it all. The point is this: he knows what I'm trying to say here. Sooner rather than later, Patrick Mahomes is going to be asked questions about how much longer he's going to play. That's normal. That's natural. He hasn't been asked it yet. Between what his mother said and this tongue-in-cheek Coors Light commercial, and he's creeping closer to 30, he's going to be asked the question. That's my only point. The question is coming. It's coming. 40, 45, 50? How long? Hey, all it takes is one person at a press conference. Hey, Patrick, how long are you going to play? Your mother said you may not play as long as Tom Brady. How long are you going to play? It's a fair question. These guys are available to the media all the time. That's my only point. So it's disappointing to have it kind of twisted into something that it wasn't. And here's one of the things he said. I'm scrolling through here and looking at this. Wright believes media members like Florio are searching for ways to critique the Chiefs after being burned by writing them off when they struggled at times in the regular season. Dude, I picked the Chiefs to win the Super Bowl before the season started. I picked the Chiefs to win almost every week of the 2024 regular season. Look it up. I picked the Chiefs almost every week. Sims picked the 49ers almost every week. I picked the Chiefs almost every week. And I know in the playoffs, Miami picked the Chiefs. At Buffalo, underdogs, picked the Chiefs. At Baltimore, underdogs, picked the Chiefs. Super Bowl, underdogs, picked the Chiefs. I go back to the last Super Bowl, underdogs to the Eagles. And my take was, Eagles are the better team, but they don't have Patrick Mahomes. Chiefs win. Oh, and if you've forgotten, they did. So you may not like what I said, but we're just going to paint you with a broad brush of being a hater because we don't want to meet you on the merits. We don't want to acknowledge your argument. You're interrupting our fandom. I mean, Wright's clearly a Chiefs fan. He was at their parade. He waves the Chiefs pom-poms whenever he can. And I think he also had Lamar Jackson not in the top 5 quarterbacks. But Caleb Williams, a guy who's never even played in the NFL, is already a top 5 guy. So, and that's fine. That's fine. That's his prerogative. But it's just disappointing to see someone who should know better come at me without really even trying to understand, or even worse, understanding but ignoring what my point was. Because, hey, it was a slow day. So you're welcome, first of all, Nick, that I gave you some content to help you get through your show on a slow Thursday. But you know better. You know what my point was. And my point about the Kansas City Star, which has its content behind a paywall, they'll give you a little taste, and then eventually you run out of free articles and you got to pay for it. I don't know how this business model works, but let me tell you something. I can't imagine anybody paying for these articles from a guy named Pete Gradhoff, who basically puts together 10 paragraphs of word salad with no original thought and then just starts pasting tweets in. I mean, you're paying for that? Hey, anybody that's subscribing to the Kansas City Star is a sucker if that's what you're paying for. I mean, I'm paying for quality if I'm going to pay for anything. There's too much free content out there to put up articles that you can see on The Spun or whatever other clickbait website there is out there that doesn't charge you to read it. If you're going to charge me to read it, you got to come up with something better than pasting in 20 different tweets and a 10-paragraph story that adds nothing to the conversation, just takes my quotes and Nick's quotes and puts on a headline. Let me get the headline right because I enjoyed it too much to not get it wrong. Nick Wright crushes NBC reporter for story on Patrick Mahomes' future. And here's the other thing, too. These people that are going to cover the media, and I've made this point from time to time, I'm easy to find. You want to get a quote from me? Wouldn't it make for a better story? Don't you advance the ball, Pete Grathoff, if you get a quote from me to add to your story? And there's an element of laziness to today's media where there's no effort to try to advance the ball, either with an original thought or a quote that isn't already out there for anyone to see. Anyway, that's all I have to say about that. I said more about that than I wanted to, but that's all I have to say about that. All right, let's see what questions we have. Kristen Coleman put some of them on Instagram today. Here's one from 19 Times Music. Kirk Cousins' image was boosted by the quarterback series on Netflix. Will that happen with any of the 5 receivers on receiver this year? The fact that it's 5 instead of 3 is going to dilute the impact. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I thought quarterback would become something that guys would be lining up to do. They couldn't find 3 more quarterbacks to do it this year. They had to change the name of the show. They couldn't find quarterbacks to do it. So we'll see. But I think the more guys that are the subject of it, the harder it is for any one guy to be showcased to the point where people end up liking a guy that they previously didn't know. And I think that's what a lot of it is. If you do it the right way, you produce it the right way, you use the right clips, it's going to make people likable, even if it did raise some questions about whether or not Kirk Cousins really wants to pursue a Super Bowl championship because he doesn't work on Tuesdays. I really wonder whether he's going to work on Tuesdays this year. Between the desire to win a Super Bowl and having Michael Penix Jr. available on the roster, waiting for his chance, I wonder if Kirk is going to work like Patrick Mahomes works on Tuesdays. There wasn't any talk about Mahomes taking Tuesdays off. Anyway, we'll see if any of the 5 receivers take Tuesdays off. We'll learn a lot about Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, and one more that I can't remember. I was hoping I'd remember all 5. But either way, it's coming soon. Last year was great, and it can't hurt your image to be part of it. I say that, though. It really wasn't great for Marcus Mariota because he came off as a guy who quit on his team. So it could hurt your image to do it, but it also could help, as Kirk Cousins found out. Nate K. Foster wants to know, will Sunday ticket prices finally go down? We'll see. I talked about that earlier. That's the decision the NFL has to make. Are we going to let it ride with the high prices and maybe have more exposure if we ultimately lose? Or are we going to say, you know what, we think we're going to eventually win. We're not changing anything. That's the decision they need to make sooner rather than later. Searing M1, what happens to the Jets if Woody Johnson takes another job in Trump's potential second administration? I think Woody Johnson ends up being the ambassador to the UK again. I think he wants that. I think I've heard he wants that. Last time around, he handed the reins to Christopher, his brother. That caused some of the Jets competitors to say, Christopher may be better than Woody. Maybe this isn't a good thing. But the Jets still, frankly, can't get out of their own way, whether it's Woody or Christopher. But that's what would happen. Christopher would be in charge of the Jets again until Woody comes back. Mark Y. Dinan, any chance you'll bring the show to London for one of the games in October? We've talked about this. First step is get passports. I know. I don't have a passport. I assume Sims does, but I don't know because it doesn't matter until I do. Get the passport and then decide when do you go. Do you go in the off season and do a week over there of shows throughout the UK and Ireland? Or do you go during regular season and be there for the week prior to the game, go to the game? The challenge then becomes contributing to Football Night in America from London. We could probably go to a Sky studio and Chris and I could do our thing from there if we go there for a week during the season. So first step is get the passport. Then the challenge becomes, when do we go? But we very much want to go. I think that it would be a lot of fun for us. It'd be a lot of fun for our followers in the UK and Ireland. There are a lot more than I realized. I think we'd be stunned. I think at the end of the day, when we show up for some of these venues, we're going to need a bigger boat for a lot of these places if and when we do this, because there's a lot of people over there who are rabid NFL fans. They watch our show every day, and I think it would be a lot of fun to come over there and meet some folks. Now to any questions that may be on Twitter. We're going to start with our good friend PFT PM Posse. Due to the number of players tagged or tendered with restricted free agent tags, is that tag worse for players as a whole than the franchise tag? It's not necessarily worse. It only applies to undrafted free agents because they get 3-year contracts and then they're eligible for unrestricted free agency or restricted free agency, as the case may be. And they don't even get 3-year contracts. They become exclusive rights free agents. They're basically year to year. After 3 years, that's when the restricted free agency tender becomes an issue. And it's nothing like the franchise tag. It does delay the eligibility for free agency, but it basically takes an undrafted player and turns him into essentially a drafted player by giving him a salary for that 4th year. And there isn't a lot of movement that happens with restricted free agency. I think there's some collusion that happens with restricted free agency, quite frankly. Here's one from Joe Bucks fan. Maybe you explained it before and I missed it. How is Sunday Ticket a violation of antitrust when cable and satellite companies who force you to buy channels you don't want are not violating antitrust? Here's the reality. They're one company. If whatever the cable provider is, so let's say Comcast, we'll go with our corporate overlords. If you have the Comcast cable package, you want to buy it, here are the channels. This is how it works. You can get this level, you can get that level, but they bundle it. It's one company. The issue with the NFL is it's 32 independent businesses. They benefit from the broadcast antitrust exemption as it relates to selling the rights to the networks that televise the games. But when you're talking about this Sunday Ticket thing, that's where it becomes the potential or actual, as far as the jury is concerned, violation where you're rigging it to fix the price for one product to protect another product. And if it was one business, it would be fine. But it's 32 businesses coming together and moving in concert to make these things happen. That's the difference in a nutshell, or something slightly bigger in a nutshell. CJ Newman, can you break down to the best of your knowledge how the compensatory draft pick process works? No, I can't. I'm not even going to try. It's in the CBA. Some teams understand it well and they know how to do it. Other teams don't or don't care. It's based on the number of free agents you sign, the number of free agents you lose. And different players trigger different levels. And again, it's a whole thing. It takes a lot of knowledge and experience and time to figure it out. Some teams know how to do it and some teams don't. Paul Silva. And I'm going to skip that one. We've already discussed that. Connor Rutledge is an important question, not football related, but as an avid cigar smoker myself, what is your go-to cigar? I do the Padron 1964 Anniversary Series Hermosa regular wrapper. It's about 4 inches. It's 56 gauge. It's because I don't like smoking a big giant cigar because it gets to a point where that taste stays with you for like 18 hours afterward. My desire to have a cigar is satisfied by, not something that is like one of those big comical cigars that takes an hour to smoke. It takes me about 30 minutes to 45 minutes. It's a great cigar. It's not a cheap cigar, but that's my go-to. That's the one I like more than any other. All right. Buffalo expat, the NFL recently announced there would be no supplemental draft this year. I've always been fascinated with this process as it can pay big dividends for a few weaker teams able to benefit from it. Who do you regard as the best player ever drafted in the supplemental draft? I was going to do this research. I didn't get a chance to. It had to be Chris Carter. He was a supplemental pick of the Eagles and he became a Hall of Famer. Not with the Eagles, obviously, but the supplemental draft has really just kind of dissipated in recent years. Bernie Kosar is one of the names that stands out. I think Brian Bosworth was a supplemental draft pick. It was a way for guys to engineer their path into the NFL separate and apart from the draft. And the way it works is you basically use next year's draft pick in advance in whichever round. And it wasn't like a normal draft. It was, and is, if they use it, with each round, as it happens, you put in, okay, in this round, I don't want anyone, or this is the player I'll take. And you find out if you are the one who gets the player because, let's say, you're 21st in the priority list, you say, this is the player I want, and it turns out someone higher than you wanted that player too. They get that player. And then it moves on to round 3, round 4, round 5, round 6, round 7. It really happens very quickly when they do it. And it's been a while. I think Terrell Pryor is the last significant supplemental draft pick that I can remember. That was back in 2011. So it's not what it used to be. And I'm not really sure why. I think it's just easier for players to get to the NFL now. They get there after 3 years following their high school class graduation. And also with NIL, for a lot of these guys, why do I want to engineer my way out of college when I can stick around and make some money before I get started in the NFL? Molly Sadwasser, is there a possibility of Dak going to Seattle at some point? I don't know. I mean, if he becomes a free agent next year, the Cowboys can't tag him. If the Cowboys don't re-sign him, he'll become a free agent. What are the Seahawks going to want? They can tear up the Geno Smith contract at any time. Will they like Sam Howell? He's under contract for 2 more years. I said on KJR radio the other day that it's arguably in the Seahawks' best interest for Sam Howell to end up playing, winning the job, being the long-term quarterback, because he's younger, he's still under his rookie contract, and his ceiling may be higher than Geno Smith's. We don't know what his ceiling is. He had 1 year as a starter in Washington. It was kind of dysfunctional last year, kind of a strange season. He threw a lot of passes, played a lot of football, was durable. Who knows? He may be better than Geno Smith ever was. And he's early enough in his career, he could be your guy for 15 years. So if they see enough from Howell this year and decide it's not him, if they've decided Geno Smith has taken him as far as he can, maybe they would be in it for Dak Prescott. That's what's going to be interesting, though. If Prescott hits the open market, which teams will want him? And how much more would someone have to offer over whatever the Cowboys' best offer is to get Dak Prescott to say yes to that team? All right, let's see what else we got here. Probably should wrap it up. God, I think it's almost been an hour already, so I probably should wrap it up. Scrolling. Zachary Barnett, what would you think of the NFL incorporating a luxury tax system? Who would be best suited to succeed if such a thing were implemented? Who becomes the NFL's version of the Pirates? Who becomes the Dodgers, Mets, Yankees? It shouldn't happen, and Jerry Jones would supposedly, we'll see. Because I think a lot of this, you'd be surprised at the size of the check that I would write if I could guarantee myself a championship. I think that's bogus. I think this is all about keeping the Cowboys relevant and popular and financially viable. But yeah, I don't even want to think about a luxury tax. The salary cap works as it currently is. All right, let's see what else we have here. We're probably done. This is the last one. We're going to circle back to the Sunday ticket trial. Saints are life. Is the mainstream sports media's silence on the Sunday ticket issue an indication that we need a new sports network to come into prominence? Is ESPN done as a viable source? Look, Pat McAfee had me on ESPN to talk about the Sunday ticket case, so you got to give him credit for that, and you got to give them credit for giving him the platform to talk about whatever he wants to talk about. But it has been odd to see ESPN kind of began to cover the case almost kicking and screaming. There weren't a lot of outlets that had reporters there on a regular basis. As I've said before, it was very hard to find the bits and pieces that helped me understand where the case was going. It was really disappointing. This was a major case. And even if the verdict had been 0, it's still a major case that should have been covered a lot more zealously and with a lot more curiosity than it was. Because, look, at the end of the day, as I've said, the NFL hopefully will be shamed into ending this process of screwing the consumers by overcharging for Sunday tickets so they choose not to buy it and just watch the games available in their local markets. That's what they've done for 30 years. That needs to come to light, and they need to be criticized for it. And if they're criticized for it loudly enough, maybe they'll change it and the consumer wins. So on that issue, look, fans, I'm on your side. I want you to have access to these games at a cheaper rate. And if they're doing something that is legally wrong, or just wrong in the basic standpoint of what's right and what's wrong, it should be rectified. They can't say football is family and then treat the consumers the way they've been treated under the Sunday ticket formula for the last 30 years. I probably should stop before I get myself in any real trouble or as Michael Clayton said to the woman who was the general counsel from North, I'm not the guy you kill, I'm the guy you buy. So keep that in mind, NFL, if you don't like what I'm saying. I'm kidding, by the way. I also was going to talk a little bit about what we saw last night in the debate, but you know what? I got nothing to say. I might have something to say in the future, but I got nothing to say that others aren't already saying. And it'll be interesting to see if those who have some big decisions to make the decisions that need to be made. Because last night was rough. Last night was stressful. Last night was an eye-opener, to say the least. So that's all I'll say about that for now. I saved it for the very end. So if you get frustrated by it, you don't need to turn it off. We'll turn it off for you. That's it for today. We'll see you next week. Can't do Monday. Probably back Tuesday. Otherwise, no days off on PFT with fresh content around the clock. Thanks as always for some of your time. We'll see you real soon. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.